Welcome to the INREM podcast, where we discuss the law for real estate investors. Andy and Sean are both attorneys. Nothing said in this discussion should be considered legal advice. We're simply providing information and education. You should consult with an attorney in your state regarding any specific legal issue that you may have. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining the show today. Our topic is the Investor's Guide to Language in Lending Instruments. I'm Andy Fowler, and I'm here with Sean St. Clair. If you're new to the show, give us a like, subscribe to our channel. We have a YouTube, Facebook, wherever you find us. Make sure to continue to follow, subscribe, and stay with us. We really appreciate it. With that, we're going to go to Sean, who's going to give us our legal update.
So the legal update today is the Garn-St. Germain Act, which is a federal law and federal statute that deals with a lender's ability to invoke a due on sale clause, which is timely considering that our topic today is language in lending instruments, right? And so I receive the question all the time of, well, Sean, if I do estate planning and I move a property from my name to a trust, will that invoke the due on sale clause? And the answer is no. And the reason why is there's federal law that basically states that that's the case, that the lender, regardless of what it states in the loan documents, the lender cannot invoke the due on sale clause under that particular circumstance. So if you transfer your property to a trust for which you're the settlor or the grantor and the beneficiary and trustee, and you continue to occupy the property, then there's no issue there. So that's not the only scenario, though, that this comes into play. And I think it's important to go through, and I'm going to run through the different scenarios where it comes into play, because there's maybe some opportunities here for investors to realize, hey, wait a minute, I can do this without invoking the due on sale clause. And they're not aware of this, Garn-St. Germain Act. So the first one, regardless of what is in the loan documents, the very first one is that any owner can create a lien or other encumbrance subordinate to that particular loan against the property, as long as the lien or encumbrance does not result in the transfer of occupancy to the property. Perfect example would be a second position loan, a hard money second position loan, a HELOC. You're not giving those lenders occupancy or rights of occupancy. You're simply giving them a lien or encumbrance against the property. And so according to this statute, it states, I don't care, lender, what you put in your loan documents, that you don't want the owner or the borrower to have a subordinate lien, and that will result in the invocation of the due on sale. It doesn't. And that borrower's free to go and obtain second position financing without you saying, oh, you've breached my loan documents and now I'm going to foreclose. The second is the creation of a purchase money security interest for household appliances. So, if you create a security agreement and interest in either the property or the appliances, which would be fixtures, they would become part of the real estate. You can do that if it's for the purposes of purchasing appliances. Well, you think about that. A lot of our clients invest in short-term vacation rentals,
Sure,
or even rentals in general, and they want to put appliances in those properties. Well, they can go out and get secondary financing and secure those loans against those appliances or against the fixtures in the property and not invoke the due on sale clause. Another would be a transfer as a result of a death of an owner where the property is held by joint tenancy with right of survivorship. So if you have two people on the property and say both are borrowers or just one's the borrower, and the borrower dies, and it automatically conveys to the other joint tenant, who maybe isn't the borrower, but maybe signed the security agreement or something like that, that doesn't invoke the due on sale clause at that point. And the lender can't pursue its due on sale clause. Another is granting a leasehold interest of 3 years or less. So as long as the lease is 3 years or less, you can give someone else occupancy in the property, even if the loan documents say that that would be a due on sale clause, as long as you don't give them an option to purchase in conjunction with that lease. That's what it provides. Now, not every note or deed of trust or mortgage that has a due on sale clause is going to state that options are not allowed. It just really depends on the language of the instrument. But if the language of the instrument says, well, options aren't allowed, then you could give a lease, but you can't give an option. But a 3-year lease is a long period of time, right? And there's nothing prohibiting you from giving them, say, a right of first refusal or something like that. It's just an option. You can't give them an option to purchase.
But does the option, even if the lease is longer than 3 years, does it matter?
It doesn't matter, but but that's assuming that the language in the mortgage or deed of trust has that prohibition.
Sure.
So this isn't saying what you can't do. This is saying what you can do. What's going to control is the language of the note, deed of trust, or mortgage. Some lenders are more encompassing and try to include everything that you can think of, which includes the ability to rent the property, includes the giving of an option, agreement for sale, whatever the case may be. They can put those provisions in the loan documents and say, well, that is a transfer and alienation of the property, and therefore we have a right to a due on sale. But if they say, well, you can't lease the property, you can't enter into a lease for the property and give someone else occupancy, and if you do, then we have a right to call the loan due and file a foreclosure action. That provision won't stand federal law. So federal law basically says, hey, you can rent your property up to 3 years and the lender can't do anything about it. Another example, and this is important, our firm does a lot of probate work, and another example of when the due on sale clause won't be invoked is if there's a transfer to a relative of the borrower that results from the death of the borrower. So a borrower dies, they leave in their will or their trust, they leave the property to their 2 children, and the children want to keep the property and they want to pay the loan. They can go ahead and pay the loan, and the lender can't do anything about it. The property can go to them. They can go to them in their name, and they can write the monthly mortgage payments to the lender, and the lender can't invoke the due on sale clause. Another example is a transfer to a spouse or children of the borrower of the owner, or the children of the borrower. So if you give an ownership interest to your children or to your spouse, that doesn't invoke the due on sale clause. So you can convey the property to those individuals without invoking the due on sale clause. A transfer for purposes of divorce. So let's say that, and this happens, husband and wife, one has better credit than the other, right?
Right.
And so let's just say wife has better credit than the husband, and is working full time and has the wages to support it. So the wife goes out and obtains a loan, and the property is her sole and separate property, and the husband signs a disclaimer of interest, right?
Right.
Well, then they use that home as their marital community and marital home, and they use community assets to pay the mortgage, to improve the property. In essence, it becomes community property.
Sure.
And the 2 divorce, and the husband wants to keep the house, but the husband's name's not on it. And the court can go ahead and award that property to the husband, and it can be conveyed by the wife to the husband or by the court to the husband. And that doesn't invoke the due on sale clause. So that's allowed. And then finally, we already talked about this, a transfer to a trust where the borrower is the settlor, grantor, beneficiary of that trust, and they don't give up the occupancy to someone else as a result of the transfer, then that is perfectly allowed and does not invoke the due on sale clause.
Interesting. Well, so for the listener who's wondering, how can this even be possible? How does this work? It's really under the doctrine of federal preemption, right?
Yeah.
This idea that state law might say something and your contract might be overly encompassing in every possible scenario and cover just about every scenario you've thought of. But if federal law otherwise says something to the contrary, and state law or that contract interferes with that, federal law preempts. So that's
Mhm.
really good, and that goes to show you how that's really meant to help make property, alienable among heirs,
Mhm.
among family. Otherwise, just imagine a probate where you could invoke the due on sale clause just because of a death and a transfer. Basically, it would interrupt inheritance law completely, right?
Well, and this is a very important concept that needs to be recognized by probate attorneys as well as by heirs and investors. I- the fact that the market is shifting, the fact that we may start seeing short sales or properties underwater. Let's say hypothetically you have a property where you purchased it using one of those 1.8 2% loans, right? So
Right.
your monthly payment is reasonable, but now the market shifted and the property's underwater. So, and then the owner dies. Well, as the heir, you're like, well, why do I want this property? It's underwater. Well, what if it cash flows? So you think, oh, well, I'll just unload it. I'll just let the lender foreclose. Well, wait a minute. If it cash flows, why would you want to do that? Right. I mean, if you
Sure.
can make some money off of it every month, why not convey it to you? And you can convey it and you don't violate the terms of the loan documents. And you're perfectly, capable of doing that. And federal law would trump and the lender couldn't do anything about it. So it's something to consider even as the market is turning. Well, wait a minute, there's opportunities here in a probate to, you know, transfer that property without liquidating it, without selling it, because you can't sell it, it's underwater. And you transfer it so that you can take advantage of the low interest rate that's in place and the cash flow. Um, and even if there is equity in it, well, maybe you do want to transfer it because if you sold it, you're losing out on that low interest rate potentially. So, it's something to keep in mind considering that rates have been so low for so long that there's probably going to be properties that are coming up that are, in the probate scenario with very low interest rates that the heirs want to keep and
Right.
rightfully so.
Right. All right. With that, we're going to go into today's topic. We're talking about language in lending instruments. And today on the show, we have guest Oggie Penev. Augie is an associate broker with EXP Realty. And we're so happy to have you on the show. Thanks for being with us, Augie.
Thank you, guys. Andy, Sean, nice to meet you. Nice to see you again.
Yes. Tell us about your real estate practice.
Oh, show way. It's been what, 17 years since I got my license. Started just like a real estate agent, um, helping clients buy and sell properties. Later, I opened my own brokerage, then started an investment company, Home Pro Invest, and we started a property management company, Pro X Realty Management. And somewhere in between, I started investing in real estate myself. So anything residential real estate, it's my my expertise, I guess.
Now, you mentioned, I know you're a real estate investor. You mentioned your property management company. Tell us about that. Does that offer any unique services for real estate investors?
Actually, yes. I'm proud to say that we're the only property management company in Maricopa County that offers free property management option.
Really?
Yes. So I have a way to have your property management fees waived and you pay zero, you know. So
Good to know. So as a real estate investor, Give us and our listeners an idea about your investment portfolio. What kind of transactions and investments are you typically looking for?
So I like buy and hold. Buy and hold is I buy rental properties and with a 20, 30-year strategy, and even with the option of never sell the property. That gives me the most return on investment. And I found really unique way to buy these rental properties without any cash of my own. So for me, real investment deal is the deal that I have none of my cash into the deal. It's other people's money, and most of the time it's the bank's money. So I'd like to finance 100% of the deals with zero cash out of my pocket.
You host a monthly buy and hold real estate meetup. Tell us about the meetup.
Yeah, so the meetup is connected to the buy and hold strategy that I've done. I feel that that's the topic I know a lot about that I can help other investors, teach them how to do it successfully. Of course, I want to help my property management company get more clients, so that's one of the things. But it's a great event. A lot of get a lot of people. I meet new people every time, fellow investors, topics. We get anywhere from 70 to 100 people every time, so it's good.
So I want to get into lending instruments, specifically talking a little bit about strategies, the documents, the market. And I know a big area in this industry now is creative finance and the ability to understand and utilize creative finance strategies. Do you think your ability to understand and use creative finance strategies is going to be it will be useful as the market shifts, if the market shifts, and why?
Absolutely. Market is shifting all the time. It's either going up, going down, but the more you know, the more strategies you know, the more deals you're going to do. Because if you're only buying cash or doing wholesale only, nothing else, then you're limiting yourself to one option. But if you have five, six different options, then out of 10 potential leads, instead of just buying one, you may buy five or six using all these different strategy based on the seller's needs. So knowing different strategies, it's really important for an investor.
So let's talk a little bit about the different creative financing strategies available to investors like yourself. What kind of strategies are you using in creative finance for leases?
For leases, as far as doing a lease purchase,
Sure.
so um, one of the ways you can, I mean, I don't do this a lot, but a lot of people like to buy the properties and then give it as a lease purchase to tenants. That's one of the strategies investors like. And the reason for that is first, when you do the lease purchase, the tenant puts a little like an option money on the front, and it's like they have a higher stake in the game. And also, on the lease purchase, the tenant or the future buyer is maintaining the property, not you. So a lot of the burden on maintaining and getting calls for fix-ups, it's not there. So a lot of investors like that strategy. Plus, you get a premium rent also. Let's say the rent is 1,500 on a normal long-term rental property, but you're giving an option to the tenant to buy it. You can do a premium rent. Let's say instead of 1,500, you say, "Hey, Mr. Tenant, the rent is going to be 1,800, not 15 what the market is, but the extra $300 that I'm charging you, they will go towards the purchase price of the property when you're ready to buy it in 3, 4, 5 years." The reason you do this is to increase your cash flow, and also all the investors know that 60% of these lease purchase agreements, they don't work, they don't happen. So the tenant cancels the contract, you take the property back, and you do the lease purchase agreement with somebody else again. But in the meantime, you've been getting above average rent plus a deposit plus the person has been maintaining the property. So
Yeah, I love that strategy. And if you're able to put that in place, you could also, if you ever need to, unload the property and sell it for, high dollar because you have a good cash flowing tenant in there, with a strong lease payment.
yeah, it's perfect because the future buyer for your property, you can very easily calculate the profit because you have a above average rent and then you have a set price they're willing to buy the property. So
Right. Uh, I know I've met a couple of our firm, as you know, sponsors is one of the sponsors of the buy and hold meetup. And so at the meetup, I've met a couple of investors who do rental arbitrage, um, uh, mainly doing like Airbnbs and stuff like that. Are you familiar with that? And have you ever used that strategy?
yeah, no, I mean I'm very familiar with that. I just don't
Yeah.
use that strategy. But on a back end, as an investor, I'm to be the owner. For example, let's say you buy a sixplex in a good area in
Hmm.
Tempe, for example, and instead of you going to rent the individual units long term, what you can do is there's some good experienced operators of short term rental properties. You go to them and say, listen, I'm going to give you my sixplex to you, and I'm going to allow you to do arbitrage. And then you it's like a triple net lease. They
Hmm.
handle
Yeah.
the repairs.
Right.
They usually handle the repairs better than the actual tenants.
Hmm.
So and you're getting above average rent.
Hmm.
It's on time and they maintain the property, and you have to deal with one tenant versus six. So me as an investor, I like the arbitrage. uh, for me being on the back end as an investor, giving it to, but you have to be careful who you're giving it to. It has to be an experienced operator that knows how to manage Airbnb properties, especially now when we're going into a recession. You have to be careful too, because
Right.
with all the competition, the local government's trying to put as many restrictions as possible on Airbnbs. You know, in a recession, the first thing that stops is tourism, travel, so you have to be careful.
So just for our listeners, and we use kind of a industry term, arbitrage or rental arbitrage. What that means is basically you go and as an investor, you go to an owner, like you said, somebody, for example, that owns a sixplex, and you go to them and say, "Hey, look, um, you lease your property to me for 5 years." Or 3 years to avoid maybe the due on sale clause, right? Because we talked about that. You lease it to me for 3 years, I'll pay you market rent for the property, but I'll do everything. I'll handle everything. You won't even hear from me again. But and see, a lot of leases won't and landlords won't allow this. But you're going to let me sublet till I'm blue in the face. You're not going to put any sublet restrictions on me. And then I'm going to go and VRBO it. I'm going to Airbnb the units. And of course, if you're successful with the VRBO and Airbnb, you're receiving more than fair market value in monthly rent. Maybe not every month, but on average, you're receiving an amount greater than fair market value rent, which is why people do Airbnb or VRBO versus the long-term, tenants. And so, you're giving the owner fair market rent, but then you're able to then sublet and put short-term tenants in there that are paying, well over fair market value. But I like that strategy from an owner's perspective of, hey, I have this, I can convey this to another investor, or not convey it, lease it to another investor for fair market value. and I'm out. I don't have to be the landlord anymore. I don't have to get that, midnight phone call that, the toilet's backed up, or, I have this problem with the unit. Instead, I can draft a lease in such a way that, it basically um, foists on the new owner, not the new owner, the tenant, the, full repairs. Now, obviously, Augie, you and I both know, so anything, I believe, fourplex or less is going to fall under the Arizona Residential Landlord Tenant Act. So there's
Yes.
only so much that you can foist in those, anything fourplex and under, that you can foist on the new owner as far as repairs. And not, I keep saying new owner. It's not new owner. I'm saying the tenant, the rental arbitrage, the
But
investor.
listen,
There's only so
this.
much you can foist on them as far as repairs go.
I mean, it you don't need much because
Mhm.
so once we go over 4 units, we go into the commercial, right?
Correct.
5, 6, 10
Yes.
units. So let's do the calculations on 10 units. Once we go in the commercial side, we're talking with sophisticated investors, and now
Mhm.
we start talking about cap rates.
Yep.
And with the commercial, we calculate everything in cap rates. And I'll give you an example how simple increase on rent can give you a lot of money on the property. So let's say calculation of the cap rate is 4% in the Phoenix market. Let's say it's just an example. It's not a real number. It's an example. It's 4% is what the investors are willing to to have as an investment on the property, as a return on the investment. So let's say you have 10 units. Each one is $1,000 per regular rent, and then you go and rent it to this person that's going to do arbitrage with $50 more, with 1,050, and then by having them do the repairs, you reduce average of $500 per month um, expenses. So average, you make $100 per unit per month. So that's about a thousand bucks for 10 units. Because we calculated by a year, this is 12,000 extra income for that particular property. So the way we calculate it, you take the 12,000 extra profit and you divide it by the cap rate, and then you're going to see how much you increase the value of the property on paper. So let me calculate it. I cannot do it in my head, but let's say we have 12,000 a year increase of profit, and then we divide it by the cap rate of 4. Hold on, 12,000. That's a 300,000 extra value in the property. So
Just simply by doing leasing it to an investor who's going to do arbitrage.
yes, because
Yeah.
you're reducing the expenses and increasing the rent a little bit, gives you total of 12,000 extra profit on the P&L statement. And because in the commercial we run everything by cap rates, and it's just take the extra income divided by the cap rate, and by simply doing nothing else, just finding the right person, no repairs, nothing else, you're going to increase the property with 300,000.
Awesome. I love that analysis.
Yeah. So if you can increase it with 25,000, then you're going to have $600,000 of extra income. So it's very with commercial, it's a different game. Every little expense, every little raise of rent makes sense.
Well, even on the residential, the fourplex or less, you can foist a decent amount of the repairs and improvements on the tenant, but you are a little limited on what you can do there.
Hmm.
There's certain things that mainly you can't ever allow the property to be uninhabitable. So whatever repairs you need to do to make it habitable, you have to, but you can, still require, you know, f- uh, landscaping and pool repairs, pool cleaning, pool maintenance, those
Probably,
types of things you can still make the tenant
yeah,
responsible for.
yeah, and probably it's a good idea once a year to hire a property inspector to
Mm,
go inspect the whole property. Maybe have
right,
it in the lease, like a certain repairs once a year
right,
it's required to do and things like that. So you can keep an eye on the property and make sure the maintenance is done properly. So
right. Yeah, makes sense.
yeah.
Now, Augie, I think I heard you say at the beginning of this, leasing isn't even your preferred strategy.
No,
Um,
I
and you
buy and never sell. Buy and never sell. That's my strategy.
so you know a lot about things that aren't even your preferred strategy. That's let
I
me
have
let
to
me
know it. I have
y-
to know it.
yeah. So obviously, there's a number of creative financing strategies. So we're going to talk about them. Leases we just talked about, options to purchase, rights of first refusal, wraps, carrybacks. I'm curious, what is your preferred method of creative financing or creative strategy in utilizing creative financing?
I like so the way I buy my properties, I want to buy them with equity. And then I buy them with 100% financing, private funding. Then I refinance them with a regular bank on a long-term 30-year mortgage, and I use the equity against my down payment. So I own a property that is eventually 100% financed by the bank that gives me a little cash flow every month and um, is going to make me wealthy in 20, 30 years from now. It's practically like me coming to you and say, hey, Sean, Andy, I'm going to hand you this property. You don't have to give me any money. It's worth 300,000. All you have to do is manage it for 20 years and you're going to make $1 million. Would you do it?
Yeah, absolutely, right?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that's what I do. I use the bank's money. I find a good deals. I finance them 100% with the bank's money, not of my money into the deal, and I sit and I wait. And so in 20 years, that's my strategy. And my plan is never to sell any of these properties. Only replace them, exchange them for something else or something bigger.
So let's talk about the initial 100% financing that you're obtaining to purchase these properties. Where's that money coming from? Is it coming from a seller carryback? Is it coming from hard money? Where is that 100% coming from?
So you can use like let's say I can think about four strategies to do 100%. First one is you can do a subject to, which is taking over the existing loan of the property, and for a little bit until you refinance it with another bank. You can do seller carryback on 100% until you also get um, another financing from a bank. You can use private money because you'll be surprised, but if you just start asking your family and friends and tell, hey, I have a property, would you finance me? I'll give you 10% interest rate. You'll be surprised how many people have money and they will finance you. So 100% you can do that. Also, you can create your own personal bank. For example, um, let's say if you have a residential property that you live in that has a lot of equity, enormous amount of equity, you go to a bank and do an equity line of credit. They open say, hey, 250,000 line of credit, and you can use that money to buy a property temporarily for a month or two until we refinance it with a long-term loan and put the money back into the equity line of credit that you used. Same thing you
Oh,
can
so it
do.
would be a cash out refinance on that second property, and then you basically pay yourself back.
You don't do cash out refi because cash out
Oh.
is you take the money and you keep paying the loan all the time. What I'm talking about is just the equity, you take it as a line of credit and you don't pay. They're available there as a big credit card. And if you need the money, just take as much as you need. Let's say the line of credit is for up to 250. You take 200,000 to buy a property, and the moment you take 200,000, you start making payments only on 200,000.
Mhm.
2 months later, you refinance with a 30-year investment loan, and you put the money, the 200,000, you pay back the line of credit, and you payments stop because you're not using it. Only
Now,
use the line of credit when you need it.
so let's kind of, I'm fascinated by this. So let's take it to its conclusion here. So you pull out $200,000 from your current property that you own
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
via a line of credit. Then do you uh, create like an LLC or something that then provides the loan for you to purchase the property so that there's a note and deed of trust secured against the new property that you're purchasing, or do you just take the 200,000 and buy the new property in cash?
Yeah, awesome question. That's where the trick is.
Oh,
So
Yeah.
here's it.
Check
So
it out.
all right, whatever you guys stop doing it and listen to me very carefully.
okay.
If you pull the money and buy the property cash, let's say the property is worth 250,000 and you can buy it for 200. If you take the 200 out of your line of credit and buy it cash, and then go on the next day to refinance with the bank, they're going to say, oh, no, 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 no. You paid cash. What you want to do, what you're trying to do is cash out refinance.
Mm-hmm.
So we cannot take the real value of the property, which is 250,000, for another 6 months. For the first 6 months of the cash purchase, we take in consideration the purchase price of the property. So even though the property is worth 250, you bought it for 200. And if you want to get your cash out, the bank is not going to allow it. They can, they're not going to consider the property's worth 250. They're going to consider only the purchase price. That's for the first 6 months. So they're going to refinance only, let's say, 80% of the 200,000 that you bought the property. So you're going to have 40,000 left into the deal. You're not going to get all your money out.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of doing cash, you go to Andy and Sean and say, hey, why don't you create an LLC that's going to be my private hard money company? And we call it Sinclair's Funding. I mean, don't put your name actually. Let's say legalfundinggroup.com, something. And you put the 200,000 cash into the LLC, into the bank, the LLC, and then you go to your own LLC and borrow money from that LLC, and then you create a
Your audio went out.
and this way, when you go to the bank right after you close on the 200,000 purchase, the next day go to your mortgage guy and say, listen, I have a loan for 200,000 from this private money company. They don't know you own the company. They just see an LLC that has a recorded lien, 100% financing, a note. Say, what I want to do is I want to refinance this loan. I don't want to do cash out. I just want to, the existing loan, I want to replace it with your loan. In this case, the bank says, okay, no problem. For us, this is not a cash out refi. This is rate in term refi, which means you take an existing loan, you're replacing it with another loan. So when you have a rate in term refi, then you can take the appraisal value in consideration. So then the bank sends an appraiser, and appraiser comes and says, oh, the property is worth 250,000. Gives the appraisal to the bank, and bank says, you know what, usually have to give us 20% down payment, but you already have 20% equity. So you don't have to give us anything. So they give 200,000 to the title company to put 30-year investment loan. The 200,000 pays the loan to your private funding LLC that you created, and then the money comes back to you into from that LLC goes back to your equity line of credit. So using this, the way this transaction works, you'd have zero money, zero cash out of your pocket. You own the property with 20% equity that cash flows a little bit, and you use 100% of the bank's money, none of your money.
So in doing this strategy, just so basically you create your own LLC, you then make that LLC the lender, and with terms, and obviously there's imputed interest and things like that, that have to be dealt with from
There's a
higher up.
lot of little things that it depends how you set up the note.
Right.
So you have to be very careful how you set up the note. But yes,
Yeah, so you basically form an LLC. That LLC is the lender, and then because there's a note and deed of trust out there, then it's no longer really a cash out refinance. It's a loan repayment. And then the lender basically says, oh, okay, instead of cash out, we're going to actually pay to, discharge a lien against the property. And from there, then you're able to refinance in a quicker time frame and for a greater loan amount than you would if you just buy it outright in cash.
exactly, because most of the banks want 6 months to a year seasoning in order for them to take the appraisal value in consideration. So this way, you shorten the time. Instead of waiting 6 months, you do it within a month, and then you move to the next property. So the whole idea is to recycle the same amount of cash and end up with multiple properties.
So why aren't more investors doing this strategy? Why do a lot of them go out there and buy in cash? What's the pitfall? What's the
Because they don't
negative
know
of this?
me. They don't know
Huh?
me.
They don't
They
know
don't
you.
know
What's the pitfalls of the strategy? What kind of things that does somebody need to watch out for?
nothing. It's all good. But this strategy works perfectly for um, professionals, people that don't have a problem with getting financing and have some money available and have a good credit.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're an attorney and you make good money for the year and you want some of this money to go towards investing, but you have saved only 300,000 cash. If you buy one, two, three properties with 25% down payment, that cash is gonna deplete and you're gonna end up with just a few properties. But if you come to me and say, hey, how do we multiply and I use the same money and my good credit and my good salary, we call it bankable, being a
Mm-hmm.
bankable, because you can walk in every bank and say, I have a good income, I have a good credit score, I can get unlimited amount of credit and loans. So you use this, and this strategy is really good for busy professionals that don't have a problem with getting financing, and also people that not looking to live off the rent. This strategy is for retirement. It's not for it's for building equity, not for cash flow.
Why is it not for cash flow?
Usually when you get a cash flow, good cash flow, it's a property in a C area, bad area. Usually these property gives you the most cash flow. But what we're looking for is for you to build equity and become wealthy for the not for now, in 20 years when you really need the money. So the good properties in the good locations, they don't cash flow a lot because you pay a little more premium for that. So I'm going for equity because at some point you create your own bank. Let's say if you find a good deals with 25% equity, this property has 100,000 equity, then you buy another one has 100,000 equity, and then you have another one have 100,000. Let's say over a period of 5 years, you build properties with 500,000 equity. You can combine this equity in a revolving line of credit, commercial, or open line of credit, and use this cash for future purposes because you're creating your own bank. I'd rather have 500,000 equity and available cash for me to buy more properties versus having 5,000 cash flow per month. Because with 5,000 cash flow per month, I can live pretty nicely, but I cannot buy another property cash. So I want the equity. I want to create a bank. I want to be bankable, and I can want to use my own cash to buy properties.
Augie, let's talk about useful provisions in seller financing documents, and some of these might be things that you utilize and others that you don't. But want to get into what have been, from our perspective and from an investor's perspective, good and useful provisions that investors should be thinking about. And let's talk about the right of first refusal for sale or assignment of the note, or of a promissory note. What is this, and when would it be useful generally, or to you?
So depend on which side of you are. Are you the one that's own the property and giving a seller carryback to an investor, or if you're an investor that wants to do a seller carryback from another person? So the
Yes, the
provision
second.
the provisions will be quite different.
Sure.
So let's say you're the seller and I want to do a seller carryback from you. Um, there's so many, I just can't. But there's one thing that very few people know, and it's called substitution of collateral. If you're going to learn something about seller carryback, learn that. And there's few people doing it, training it, or you can, you know, yeah, I'm sure you guys know how to do it into notes, but substitution of collateral pretty much allows you to, let's say, Andy, I have a property for 300,000, and I take it from you on a payment on seller carryback on a 3% interest, and I pay you 300 full market value. But in the note, I have a clause for that allows me to do substitution of collateral, which means that if I decide to sell the property that I bought from you, I don't have to pay you the $300,000 immediately. I can take the money and substitute your property, which is the collateral, with another property with equal or greater value, and keep paying the loan to you. This way, I don't want the property, but what I want is the financing. So this is, if you're going to learn something about Sarah carryback, learn substitution of collateral, because it changes the table, turns the table around. With substitution of collateral, it's no longer about the property, it's about the financing. I don't want the property. I want the term of the financing. So if you give me a loan for 300,000 on a 3% interest rate, I can keep substituting properties after property, property after property for the next 30 years for the life of the loan. And practically, I have 100% financing from you on a very low interest rate.
So one of the things that, I've worked through with some of my clients on substitution of collateral is the practical side of it, right? Which is you go and you obtain seller carryback financing, for example, and you tell the seller, "Hey, look, I'm gonna," maybe even you say, "Hey, look, your property's worth 250,000. I'm willing to pay you $300,000 over time for that property, but you have to carry it at 300,000 at 3%, like you said. So you're getting 50 grand more than what your property is worth right now, but I'm gonna do 300,000, 3% interest, but I want the ability to, swap out this property for another one. I want to substitute the collateral. I want to be able to say, okay, I no longer want this loan secured by the your current property, you're going to be secured by another property of equal or greater value than this one. So you do that. And then 6 months goes by and you find another property and you're like, oh, this is a perfect one for, the substitution of collateral to move the lien over to this other one so I can, sell this property. And so you go about that. Well, of course, the title company is going to want a release of the deed of trust, right? They're going to want something showing that, that lien's coming off the property and then it's going on to this other property. Talk to us about what that looks like from a practical side of things, and what are some things that investors can do to protect themselves to make sure that they can actually utilize the substitution of counsel, or not substitution of counsel, substitution of collateral clause.
I mean, the first thing to prevent this is to be very open with the seller.
Right.
Just tell them right up front what's going on and what's going to
Right.
happen, and say, hey, for example, we're a huge company. We have multiple properties, dozens of properties, and we move loans back and forth. So at some point, we might have to substitute this property with another one, but you're always going to be protected by an asset, so you can move it. So, but if you have a seller that doesn't want to do it or something, then you can do provisions in the note, like, for example, if they refuse to do a release, there's a clause that allows you to stop making payments on the note. So kind of forcing them to comply with you. So you have to always think about these little things. So, but I would say being honest from up front is the easiest way to handle this.
Right. And that's with everything, right? That's with, whether you're doing rental arbitrage or you're doing a subject to transaction. You really need to make sure that the owner and the lender or the seller is fully aware of exactly everything that's going on with the transaction and why you're doing it, what to expect. And generally, if you're open and you establish that good relationship with them and you disclose everything, if they're agreeable to it, they're generally going to be cooperative and work with you, during the course of either the loan or the course of the transaction, that type of thing.
Yeah, because they already agreed to get payments. So you
Right.
just have to make it easy for them and to understand that.
Augie, what about building into the contract events or triggering events that pause the borrower's obligation to pay a monthly payment? Something like if your tenant, if you're leasing it to a tenant and they stop paying, what about utilizing that? That would be a unique provision.
It would be if you can sneak it in, and and the person on the other side agrees. I'm all up for it. If I'm the one that doing giving a sour carryback to someone, I would never allow it. But you can use it in the negotiations. So you put as many provisions as you'd like, and get rid of few, like so you can end up with something that you really want into the Sarah carryback. Um, I wouldn't sweat too much if it's not there, honestly, um, because I'd rather, if I have to choose between these two, I would go with this substitution of collateral versus this one.
Yeah, and once again, these types of creative, and I want to make sure that our audience is aware. Like these types of creative provisions that are in there are very investor friendly, very borrower friendly. And so, it's one thing to draft up a note and deed of trust with all these fancy provisions and have the seller sign it. It's another to go over and explain these to the seller and make sure the seller knows what they're doing and what the terms are and that type of thing. Because you,
Yeah.
you're going to end up in hot water if just put clauses in there that are all for your benefit. The seller isn't aware of it and then later realizes, oh, what did I do?
Yeah.
On our prior show, we talked about, what's going on with the FTC and Open Door right now, and, the settlement there. And, that was all about, misstating or misrepresenting the nature of their business and the transaction. And that's what was alleged anyway. and it resulted in a settlement. And you know, at,
Maybe you can have a like provision, like let's say you take your COVID-19 experience, and let's say if it's a nationwide ban, or the tenant does the government allows the tenant not to make payments, at that time probably you should not make it until that thing is over. Um, so I mean, I think it's fair at a certain point, like poor people in California, man, it's just it's crazy, poor landlords there.
right, there were a lot of investors and landlords in even parts of Arizona. Even here in Arizona, there was about a 6 month ban on evictions. All the tenant had to say was COVID, and you couldn't obtain a writ of restitution, and kick them out. Right? You might be able to
Yeah,
get your eviction judgment, but as long as that tenant says, "Oh, I have concern with COVID, or I've lost my job because of COVID, or I may have COVID, or I'm at high risk," type of thing. I'm in the high risk category. Then the sheriff was like, "Okay, we're not going to force you out, and you can just stay here." Um, Fortunately, that's gone away. The federal government restrictions have gone away, but um, I like where you're coming from on this. It's almost like a force majeure provision, right? Which is, there is an epidemic or pandemic, or a government regulation that has impacted my ability to use this property as I intended. And as a
yeah,
result, I'm being excused from performance under the note or deed of trust. I think that's probably a much more justifiable and enforceable provision than maybe just saying, well, we're going to freeze the payments um, if I have a tenant and they choose not to pay.
yeah. Because let's say you can work with it. I mean, some bad people could work with the tenant, say, "Hey, tenant, stop making payments on paper. Give me the cash around. And on paper, I'm not getting paid. I'm not going to evict you, so I'm not going to pay my Sarah carryback
Right.
obligations." So I don't know.
Yeah.
It could, but I would say definitely use all of this as a negotiations, for in the negotiations, definitely.
Yeah, Augie, one more I want to throw at you here, and we appreciate you spending your time with us. You're an investor who cares about the long term. You're looking a decade out, probably 2 decades out. So maybe shifts in the market don't really concern you so much. But let's say you're doing a seller financing deal as the investor and they're going to carry it back. And you don't mind waiting and taking some time, but they want out, they want to put in a maturity date that's 5 years out, 5, 10 years out. And you're thinking, well, I'll just refinance when we hit the maturity date. And maybe when we hit the maturity date, the market cycle doesn't hit a place where it can hit yet, to where the property can appraise for what you need it to appraise for in order to potentially refinance them out of the deal. Is that a case where you would find it important to be an event if the property doesn't appraise in that kind of deal, that the maturity date automatically gets extended?
Yeah, definitely you want to be protected as much as you want, as much as you can. And I'm sure there's so many other little things that you and Sean can advise us, the investors, what to be included into the note. But yeah, it's hard to predict what's going to be 5 years from now. So having provision like that to extend for another two, or you have like let's say appraisal. If the property doesn't appraise, then you can extend, or if it goes up. I mean, you can go, if it goes down in value, you're not obligated to buy it or something. And same thing, if it goes more than 20% of in value, then you can increase the purchase price. So it can kind of a good for both sides, for the buyer and the seller. You have a protection if the property market goes down, way, way down. But at the same time, the seller has a protection if the value of the property doubles. They get a little more. So
Sure.
you give a little bit, you get a little bit.
Yeah. Well, Augie, we really appreciate you taking the time and talking through these issues with us. How can our listeners find and connect with you?
You can just Google my name very easily. That's the easiest way. Google Oggie Penev. And you can actually call me on my cell phone directly. That's the easiest way. Text me or call me. Uh, 602 8156. Yeah, I'll be happy to help explain any type of investment situations. Looking for to buy a property, to manage a property, I can direct you. I can help you out.
Do you have a presence on social media?
Oh yeah, I mean Instagram, Facebook. I prefer Facebook personally. Everywhere, Instagram, YouTube, you can find me. And also, we do the buy and hold event every month, every last Tuesday of the month. So if you're welcome to come, and we have great speakers. You guys are there too all the time. So it's really, really valuable information.
So find Augie on Facebook, call his cell phone, not in the middle of the night, middle of the business day. He's there for you. We appreciate you coming on. I look forward to seeing you again, Augie.
All right. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Augie.
All right, with that, that is our episode for today. Join us next week. We're talking about business and estate planning for investors with Natalia Ouellette Grice. We'll see you guys next week.
Have a good day, everyone.